Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're so excited to kick off our social media tour supporting queer-owned business with the Queer Money Project. And we're so excited that Victoria Rey is joining us here. Just a little bit about Village Preservation. We have been around since the 80s, making sure that our history, culture, and all the wonderful things about Greenwich Village, NoHo, and the East Village are preserved as best as we can. And we do this through a number of things, through advocacy, through programs like this. We have over 75 free programs every year, and this is one of them. And we're very excited to kind of expand into the Instagram universe and expand our programming to reach even more people. We are supported, we are a nonprofit, and we are supported by membership. So there is a QR code on your screen if you want to find out more about that, or you can just go to villagepreservation.org to find out more about our programs, getting involved, and becoming a member. I'm Leeanne G-Bowley. I'm the Director of Programming for Village Preservation, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Hugh, who's going to introduce themselves and our co-host for today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hugh Evans. My pronouns are they and them, and I am Village Preservation's Programming and Administrative Assistant, and informally, I also do research for queer history within the East Village, Greenwich Village, and NoHo. And we are so excited to welcome Victoria from the Queer Money Project to talk with us today about community mapping, especially among small businesses that are queer and LGBTQIA+ based. Thank you so much for joining us, Victoria.
Of course, I'm really happy to be here. I kind of, to give you a little bit about Queer Money, I can give a little intro about Queer Money Project. I started Queer Money Project in 2019. I had a job shift, and by that I mean I left my job and had a lot of time, and I had been kind of curating maps anytime I went places, whether it was like a city map or I was going to like a new place, and I was like, here's where all the places will go. But I'd also started, I had to do catering for work, and I was like, I really want to use a queer-owned business or like a BIPOC-owned business, and so I went to what the city had, like a registry of folks who had registered, and it was just like incredibly hard to find folks. And it was also like everything from HVAC to kind of like a paving company, right? It was like more in industry. So I went on the internet, I went on to like Facebook, and I was like, hey, I need a caterer. Can anybody like let me know like if you know anybody that's like a queer-owned business? This is on Queer Exchange, and all these like folks popped up, which was really cool. And so I like started thinking like, it's, my parents owned a small business my entire life, and I also grew up in a tiny town with 2 stoplights in Appalachia, and so it was very much like the local grist mill. This is where you go to get grits and grains. Like, this is like this family farm. This family like owns the sawmill, like all of these very, to your point earlier, Hugh, like Norman Rockwell-esque things. But it was also cool because you knew people and you knew you were supporting families. And I like thinking about queer community and thinking about queer-owned businesses, like, folks living in the margins to any degree have it harder. And so I think I thought it was like, oh, this would be really cool to be able to be like, I want to go to a queer tax preparer. Where do I go? I want to go to a queer butcher, etc. So I started compiling this little list, and then kind of when I left my position, it was kind of the catalyst to push this into the world. And 3 years later, and a pandemic, it's been really exciting. So I'm really excited to collaborate with Village Preservation. I think space and like people and mapping is really cool. So yeah, that's kind of like the soup to nuts of Queer Money Project.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much the origin story. So if Hugh, you want to go into the next question, that was great. And I'm from a small town that had 1 stoplight. So I totally relate to that.
Yeah.
I could beat you both. Mine didn't even have a name nor a stoplight. We had a stop sign. But so one thing that we sort of touched upon on our earlier discussions with queer businesses is that a lot of them are beginning to disappear, like especially with what we've seen in our neighborhoods of Greenwich Village and the East Village, is that, you know, financial and sort of physical gentrification has and not, I don't want to say that it's changed the neighborhood in a bad way, because in some ways it hasn't, but it's definitely increased turnover among queer communities. So as like these businesses like lesbian bars, bathhouses, clubs, they all begin to disappear, why should we support small or identity-based businesses like queer businesses?
Yeah, I think something that I have like seen in my life as my parents have owned businesses is that there's an incredible amount of wealth privilege to just like have a bit like to not have that community support. So corporations are an example, right? They have like an incredible amount of wealth privilege. So they like have space to take an L, right?
Yeah.
And I think what makes it important in investing, like in really investing in identity-based, like if family-owned business, cooperatives, and identity-based, like just knowing who you're buying from is helping that person who has probably worked their behind off, like trying to get this business up from the ground, whether it's from crowdfunding or, you know, taking out loans. I mean, so sorry, I just had a thought, but like
No,
it's
of course.
important to like help sustain them. And I was thinking, so in my neighborhood, there is this beautiful church. And I was just like thinking about the history of like owning things, right? There's this beautiful church that's in an old theater. I live in Central Brooklyn. So, and because of redlining, that church community had to come together and get a cash deposit for that church. And now they're fighting for air rights. And I think like that is an example of like why it's important to continue to support entities, cooperatives, collectives, businesses that aren't gonna like that are historically kind of not able to get those loans, or just like it's just hard. It's hard to own a business. And so I think that that's like, and seeing through the pandemic, folks who've had to call it and shut their businesses down because it's just like deeply unsustainable or like heartbreaking for them, right? I think for me, seeing places that I loved and owners that I like came to know have to shut down their businesses because like they were exhausted, it sucks. So I think that is like kind of my like main MO when it comes to just like knowing who you're buying from. And if you can't buy directly, like, you know, if this one brand doesn't have a shop, like find someone who carries their stuff. Like, so Fredericks and May, it's a queer-owned business, and they used to have a storefront now, but you can go through other small businesses to get their stuff. And so you're really doing like a daisy chain impact.
Yeah, like I not to answer my own question, but like off of it, like it's like I think what you're talking about, like circular economies and like mutual aid, talking about investing in ourselves and our neighbors, because for a lot of us, you know, especially as we live in New York, we know queer people. Like we are investing in our neighbors in our own communities. As like not just queer people, but also allies. So it's something that sort of beats down, like you said, that historic privilege that we give to heterosexual and cisgender identities. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think being able to do that is super powerful. And it's really like, I think to like allyship, I don't want you to buy a t-shirt that has a rainbow on it. I would rather you spend money or like redistribute your wealth to mutual aid or do something to actually support that community. So, because I think it makes those communities more stable and more sustainable.
Exactly. Oh my God. So well said. I support all of this. Yeah.
That's so great. And because things are shifting so much and there's new businesses, some businesses are going away. How do you find the businesses you mentioned in the beginning? You posted on the Facebook, hey, what's out there? How do you now kind of go about it and decide what to post, when to post it, and how to post it?
Yeah, so I like when I was first starting Queer Money Project, I would post and be like, hey, I started the community mapping project. Like, if you know anybody, if you know queer owned businesses, please submit, and kind of put it out there. I used Facebook, I used Lex, I used kind of like the Instagram, right? Like I posted it to the Queer Money Project and I reposted it to my own Instagram. And like I've done that like periodically. Like I'm always like, if I do a lot of content, I'll be like repost the page. It's like, this is how you submit. But then also I just love an internet rabbit hole. So and like, you know, people are connected, right? So if someone, a queer owned business posts like, oh, love this, like I'm going to see like, oh, is that business also queer owned? And so it's a lot of like internet like kind of just like looking around and seeing, but also folks who've submitted. And like I will say like, I never want this resource to be proprietary or feel like this is my like goop, like a goop-esque list, right? Like these are the, I want to present these without bias. And so I think it is like community, like that's the beauty of community mapping and community gathered resources, is that there have been folks who have submitted so many, who have like, one of my like closest friends will always just like shoot over profiles and be like, this is queer owned, and it's like, yes. And I think that is what's really special, because I hold certain identities, and those identities have blind spots, right? Like I'm a white cisgendered woman, and my circle of like knowledge is not limited to that, but like there are things that I just like am not seeing. And so I think that is like, I don't ever want this to be like Victoria's like top 10. I want this to be, and that's why I'm like mostly just like an amorphous person behind the internet, because I don't want it to be like, this is me, I am this. I want it to be like, this is a project, I happen to be the person who like facilitates and shepherds it through the internet. And I think it's really important. I mean, I just also think it's important for this to be collective.
Mm-hmm.
And this is off script, but speaking of that, you just made me think like, so what is your interaction with or inspiration from other community mapping projects? Could you talk a little bit more about community mapping? Because I wonder if people are kind of like, what is this thing we're talking about here?
Yeah. So as far as interacting with other community mapping projects, so on one of the times I posted kind of a like, hey, I'm starting this, someone who was tangentially connected to Solidarity NYC, which is like based on the solidarity economy, was like, hey, here's another community mapping project. And funnily enough, like that is how I found like a solidarity economy bank for myself. I was like, oh, I want to like actually not have a terrible, awful, decrepit bank account. So that's like some of it, right? Black Owned Brooklyn does an incredible job in highlighting Black owned businesses in Brooklyn. And I think I've been a longtime admirer of their work, and they just do an incredible job. And so I think it's like, you know, pushing out, I always call it giving shine. And so like shine theory is like, I don't shine if you don't shine. And so I always want to be like, here, I am not the only person, right? And there are other ways you can kind of shift the way you spend your money. And so I'm, Black Owned Brooklyn, Solidarity NYC, there's, and those are like really like based on economies, right? And then there's the Addresses Project and Queering the Map, which are oral histories and community gathered histories. But there's also a community mapping project called Radio Garden, which is super cool. And it's like it takes you to a map and you dip down on like an internet radio station. So you can kind of travel the world and listen to. So I think it's like, that's the thing about that I love about community mapping, and kind of what makes me so drawn to it, even though so many of the businesses that I have on Queer Money Project either are vendor, like use wholesale, right, and don't have a storefront, or have like an e-commerce site, is that being able to see a community in that way is really special. And and I community mapping is like, that is what it is. It's like being able to look inside a community from the eyes of like the folks who make it up, and not like some sort of institution.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's so interesting. And speaking about like the history of our different areas, we like Greenwich Village, NoHo, East Village. I really think about like if you zoom in on a map, so much community-based activism. You know, this is the center of so much. So I'm wondering, and Hugh, you could answer this too, how the history of that kind of community-based work influences your work, Victoria, influences how small businesses can either thrive or not in our communities. Yeah, just very interested in how like a place so steeped in some of these principles, whether true now or not, the history of that, how that impacts our work as a whole.
Yeah, and I mean, I think for me, if I'm like, and Hugh, you've done so much research on kind of this area, but like, I think what's interesting is Greenwich Village, NoHo, the East Village, they're like such destinations, right? As if you think about New York as like, you know, a place for folks to visit, like they're like, there are so many places to see, and there's so much, it's like swimming in history. Which I think like I was bopping around on the Addresses Project yesterday, like which like the part of tourism and like the way the city has been run throughout the years is like kind of pushing those small businesses out, or like not making it sustainable for those small businesses. Therefore, like what was, you know, like for instance, there's a cheese shop in Williamsburg that once stood, and now it's a diptych candle store, right? And I'm sure I'm mispronouncing, but you know what I mean? It's like, that stinks, because that was like a small business. And I think that is kind of the balance. But from my kind of viewpoint, there are there are businesses that are still that like neighborhood spot, right? And in kind of prepping for this collaboration, that was really doubled down in my brain, right? Like, this is not just a place that you go take, you know, you are like a tourist and you take pictures. This is a place where people live, and their neighborhood. So I don't, that's like kind of my thought. I feel like it's like definitely on like a pendulum up. Now the pandemic obviously has like impeded that, but I don't know, Hugh, what do you?
Yeah, so I always view like the East Village and NoHo and Greenwich Village sort of in the context of queer history as like a cradle and a cage. Like it's like it was a great incubator, but it was also a great like deterrent. But you know, that sort of acted as a catalyst in its own, even though that's sort of like paradoxical. I mean, like you can look at like Julius's Bar, which in 1966 had like a protest. Like it was very, like it wasn't necessarily a gay bar. Like it served gay patrons, but only because the mafia allowed them to, and other sort of organized crime. So that was sort of the cage part of it. But the cradle was that because they had sort of this environment where queer people gathered in our neighborhoods and in the East Village and West Village, they, you know, became powerful, like we were talking about like mutual and collective action, you know. So they protested, and then that now Julius's Bar is a very queer space, and it's a very, you know, neighborhood space. It's one of those places that like really locals and like people who know the history really cherish. So it's really, that's sort of what I feel like with the businesses here in the Greenwich Village is they carry so much weight that they you know, not only are we supporting a small business and someone's livelihood and our neighbors, but we're also carrying on a legacy of like protest and, you know, activation of rights, you know. So I think it's something that's so beautiful about the businesses in this neighborhood, especially all of not just Julius, but like those galleries along 10th Street that all managed to survive the AIDS crisis. And when you look at their stories of how, you know, their resilience and their survivance between two pandemics, really, it's really kind of honorable. Like, that's great that we get to like work to help preserve their legacy.
Yeah, and I think to your point of like the mafia owning all the queer bars, like
Oh yeah.
I've thought that recently. Yeah, I thought about that recently where I was like, how cool is it that like queer bars had to sit within like an incubator of organized crime, right? Like we were a hushed society. And now it's like we have queer owned, like queer bars owned by queer people.
Yeah.
And like that's something that feels so prolific to me that
Yeah.
we're like, that's like, it feels like a step up towards progress.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So we also, talking about like, as we're progressing and we've talked about your moments with different businesses, is there one particular business that's like your favorite or stands out to you, or you had an interaction with them that was just over the top amazing?
Huh, that's a good question. I think this is like not New York, and so
Yeah.
I apologize,
It's
but
okay.
this is kind of like related to. So like I said, I like spent my youth in like Appalachia. We and there were these two women who were a couple who owned a pottery place that they make pottery out of gourds. Like they use the gourds as mold. It's called the
Oh,
Gourd
cool.
Place. Yeah,
Mhm.
very cool. And they like for, I think in a small town that is like pretty conservative, like they operated in a really beautiful way. Like they weren't ostracized.
Yeah.
And like they're pretty beloved. And last year, I think as I've worked and to build all these relationships with Queer Money Project here,
Mhm.
um, one, they're always in my brain because it's like
Mhm.
how special to have like two elder queers kind of live down the street from me and like
Yeah.
but I ordered, my friend got married last year and I ordered a piece of pottery for her wedding from them, and I sent it, I like did it via email, and I get on the phone and one of them goes, we're like talking, and she, in my signature is, Queer Money Project. And she was like, I think we have some things in common. And I was like, yeah, we do. We do. And like, it was really beautiful. And we talked about like, um, being able to like the progress from when they were young, and they're like till to now, and kind of how that fits in my hometown. And so I would say like, that is like kind of, I don't have one favorite business or one like, but I think like being able to pop in and say like, oh hey, like how are you? And like
Yeah.
being creating like a community, right? I think the reminders when I'm like interacting with business owners or like talking to folks. Um and it's less of a like, I don't know you, and more of a like, oh yeah, like, and also like not that I'm not to say I'm like known everywhere.
Yeah.
I think it's like really cool. It like makes me feel like I live in a small town, even though I live in an enormous city.
Yeah.
And I think it's very much, it's been pretty incredible. And like also to the end of me being like this person that just like I'm like just doing this thing. I like there was a Pride market last year at the Brooklyn Museum, and I was like walking,
Mhm.
and Cards by D is a cooperative
Yeah.
that we featured, and they had like a thing, and I was just like, I'm a pretty shy person in person, and so I was like, hey, like, and I introduced myself to them, and it was like very exciting and very cool. And I think a lot of Queer Money Project has existed in the pandemic and therefore has existed solely on the internet. So it's always, I think, exciting to meet people and to be like, oh my gosh, we've been messaging. I think similarly, like, just connecting with folks and
Yeah.
being able to like kind of throw, promote and like throw things into the air when folks are like, can you like boost this?
Mhm.
That is like just as much of a resource share, like sharing your network as a resource, as much as like spending money in the queer community, right? Like having that recommendation. So that was a very long answer. And
No,
I
it
don't know if
wasn't.
it was a
That's
real,
totally
yeah,
fine.
yeah. But I would say the Gourd place is probably like my favorite, but mostly because I have like that really, that was like the only queer owned that I knew of. business like growing up, and the fact that like there are so many more in the world, but like also in the South, and like being able to do this in New York is just like pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you kind of spoke to this, but are there any other reasons? I mean, this is such a labor of love. You so excellently and thoughtfully curate. What other things kind of drive you? Because it's, I mean, you've been successful in my opinion, but so that's a driver. But is there anything else that kind of drives you as you're doing this work?
Yeah, I think I love resources. I like have worked, you know, I'm like a former teacher. I've worked in like operations and HR. And I think like, I love being able to like have to be like, oh, here you go. Like, and give people resources. And like I said, I found through the internet, like found queer tax preparation folks. And like, I cannot tell you how many people in my life I've been like, you should use this. Like, and I think that is really being able to have people be like, oh my gosh, I used so-and-so, so great, love them, right? Like, I get teased much lovingly by my friends, because they're like, you're the I know a guy person. Like, you're the, like, yeah, like I got a guy for that. Like, and that's like, I think that is just as sad, like having that resource into the world to be able to be like, here are 5 options for queer moving companies, or like, you need to get meat, here are 2 queer butchers. Like, it's just like, I think that is satisfying. I think things shouldn't be as hard. It shouldn't be, you shouldn't have to go through pages of like listicles that come out in June every year to find places to buy queer, or any sort of like, from any sort of like identity group, right? You shouldn't have to like jump through hoops. And I think this felt like the only solution for the queer community in doing so. And I think for me, I like think about my also like twofold is like, it's important for this to be accessible, right? So having a map that's like super clear, being able to, like something that is my own mountain to climb is like cleaning out the database I have and making that available on like an Excel sheet, so that folks, you're not like limited to using a cell phone. You're not limited to kind of like searching. You can really be, it's like way more intuitive. So I think that like being accessible is really satisfying to me. And I know that like, I'm not all the way there. And that's also exciting, because I think finding ways to like make this really just like something for everybody.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think what I'm really excited about our collaboration is kind of putting things in that resource way, putting things in the hands of our members and supporters and saying, here you go, explore. And so it's not like we're saying, even though it's a tour, the way we're doing it online, it gives people like the power themselves to follow through in those things, rather than meet us at the spot, we're going to take you through. Like, that's great too, but this is just another way to have people really kind of take in that information, rather than being told like, these are the 5 places you should go. Sure, we're going to recommend things, but it's all related to history, and it's on your own time, and it will be on Instagram for as long as Instagram exists. So like, excuse me, I just think that's really an exciting way for us to be also more accessible, and think about accessibility of like, if you have a kid and 6 p.m. on a Friday does not work for you for a tour, this is another way to access this information. So I really appreciate that about our collaboration. I have another question before I push it over to Hugh. Say we're all about the archive here at Village Preservation. So push yourself into the future, and you're in the future, and someone says, build the archive from the Queer Money Project. What things do you definitely want to include? What things do you maybe want to jettison? And what would that archive, like, what would the shape of that start to look like?
I also love an archive. I'm like, although the last thing I did before March 2020 took us all is went to the Lesbian Her Story archives and
Well
had
done.
the best time. Yeah, the best time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what I would want to be in the archive of Queer Money Project, I'm gonna manifest that it will still exist, like there will be some sort of existence of it. But I think definitely like just the growth, like I hope the growth of kind of what queer owned businesses were and what they are at this point. I like would love for it to be just, I don't want it to be overwhelming, but I would love for it to be like just like riches of resources, right? Riches of options. So that you're not having to be like, well, there's this one. And I think also New York is so expansive, right? And as like we potentially expand to other cities, like I am very cognizant that like you might not be able to come to central Brooklyn to try this one person who does this one thing and that's all we have because you live off Fordham Road, or like you live on Staten Island, like you live in places that aren't necessarily like super accessible to that. So I think I want the like in the just that show of growth, because in my most optimistic of kind of brain spaces, I do want it to be easier for queer folks to own businesses if they want, or like for collaboratives to come together, for people to union, like kind of all of these ways for us to come together. I want it to be so much more easier than it is now. What I would give away, I mean, I think I've talked to y'all about this, like as much as Instagram is easy and fun, it is overwhelming to me, which is why I think Queer Money, like, and I think also going into the pandemic, I really burnt myself out. And so I think like, even though Instagram is like kind of its like holder when it comes to social media, and that's how we are communicating right now, I could live without it, like I think I could live with an archive of like what was there. But I'm not like, yeah, I think I would I could do without it, if that makes sense. I say as we launch an Instagram social, but like yeah, I think it's just I think that's part of my goal in making this like a pretty sustainable resource, is like it not being closed to folks who are on social, like, because some people just aren't on social media because it is not good for them and their mental health. And I feel that. And so I think that's my dream big, is like, you don't have to if you don't want to, but if you want to, you can.
No, I definitely feel that. I definitely feel like Instagram is something that's changing as we sort of learn how this tool interacts with society. But I think it's great because you also have your website, and there's different community mapping projects that are out there now, like we were talking about. And as we sort of wrap up with our discussion today, I wanted to sort of do a little call to action, just a small one, before we go on next week. And I wanted, if you're joining us here on Zoom, I wanted to let people know, or maybe if you're viewing this on Instagram or YouTube or Twitter, if there's any ways that we can help others get involved with Queer Money Project or similar initiatives like the Addresses Project or anything. Is there a way that we can donate to your efforts so that we can support, or is there a future event or initiative you'd like to plug?
Yeah. Love a call to action.
We do.
So yeah, I think as I mentioned, like I want this resource to always be free. That said, like there are costs. There's like about, I don't know, give or take $300 a year in cost of like web hosting and not URL, all the things that come with the internet, I may be a millennial, but I'm an elder millennial and I don't get it any of it. So there is like a buy me coffee site, which is linked on the Queer Money Project site. That's like throwing $2 or $3 if you want. So if wealth is the resource you can give, that would be one. My vow is like any money that is left over from paying that is redistributed. So through mutual aid, through like organization. So I like really that is kind of my goal. I set this up last October and just like floated it out quietly, but by any means, like that's not a requirement, but that is a financial way. Otherwise, sharing it with your networks, using it as a resource is always like preferred. And if you know a queer, like if you know a queer-owned business that I might not have on the map or might be new to the city, et cetera, like submitting, there's a form linked in our Instagram bio. There's one on our website.
Yeah.
You can email it, like whatever feels right. So I think those are the three. You know, like I said, like your network is your resource. So if all you can do is say like, hey, y'all, here's a way to kind of like redo your money, that's totally fine. We also on the website, like there are links to those other community mapping projects. So there are ways like kind of, I always in that circular economy, like if you can't find it here, go to like Solidarity, go to Black Owned Brooklyn, go, if you're looking for more of a like history, right? Like go to the Addresses Project, go to Queering the Map. There's also Eat Queer by Jari Magazine, which I'm remiss to not have said sooner. And that was like also a community mapping project. So there are all kinds of ways. I think those are my three pillars of kind of like what next.
Yeah.
Cool. I just want to say thank you both for having me. I love this stuff. I think I said when we were talking earlier, like early phases of this, like I'm a big Jane's Walk gal. So I'm really excited to have kind of the spirit of a Jane's Walk, right? Which is exploring your city and seeing a community, but also making sure that it's to like borrow from my old teacher vernacular, like a challenge by choice. And also like, I don't know if we said it, but like also providing digital ways to do it because not everyone is in these streets yet. And I think that is very fair and fine. So I'm just really excited and thank you so much.
Yeah, well, we're happy to have you. And I just want to say for everyone who's viewing this, Queer Money Project, you can access them online at literally queermoneyproject.com. And if you're following along with our social media tour that we're going to be hosting over the next few weeks and through Pride Weekend, you can head on over to our Instagram where we'll be posting different posts about different categories of businesses within the East, Greenwich, West Village, and NoHo throughout the week. So thank you again, Victoria, for joining us. And we'll work with you through this.
All right. Have a lovely afternoon. And thank you both.
Thanks.
All right. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.